So, Cleopatra, probably the most famous ancient Egyptian ruler right next to Tutankhamun, or many know him as King Tut, the Boy King, and Ramesses II, who was the supposed adopted brother of Moses. Cleopatra has best been known for her many appearances throughout media, from the iconic 1963 film to her being a main character in the American animated series Clone High, or her being sent to the future in a children's book series which later was adapted into a cartoon. It can happen. But in recent years, this ruler has gotten into controversy. Oh no, Cleo here isn't being cancelled for something she did over thousands of years ago. No, the whole Cleopatra controversy is what race she was. Yep, we're doing this. So, for context, in 2023, Netflix has allowed a mini-series called African Queens, which as the name suggests, showcases the various female rulers of the African nations. Which, I'm all for. For too long, the African continent has been overlooked, and I'm happy that in recent years, people are starting to look into the rich history of Africa. Outside of slavery, colonialism, or whatever dictatorship and civil war that is occurring in the modern era. So the first episode focuses on Queen Njinga. Okay, that's pretty cool. For those who don't know, she was the queen of the southwest African nation of Angola that fought against Portuguese colonialism in the 16th century. She also sold 200,000 slaves to the Portuguese and 14,000 to the Dutch, in which many Afro-Brazilians can trace back their roots because of this. Oh, that's not looking good. While it's not bad, I would not recommend this, especially if you're looking for authentic African history, such as a lot of historical inaccuracies and many important stuff that has been omitted. But then came the episode featuring Cleopatra, and that's when everyone lost their minds. And the reason was that because Cleopatra was played by a black actress. Many accused the series of blackwashing, with it even causing controversy in Egypt to the point where an Egyptian lawyer threatened to sue Netflix. There was also a hashtag movement called Egyptians for the Egyptians, in which many Egyptians had compared themselves to Cleopatra and saying that they had no African roots. Which I respond by saying, one, it's nice to see you guys are still holding on to your colonial past, and two,
Oh wait, you're serious? Yeah, no, that's not happening.
This is probably the reason why in more modern animated projects, Cleopatra's given an olive skin complexion as sort of a compromise. So, was Cleopatra actually white, or was she black? Or was she something else? Well, before we get into that, we have to ask who Cleopatra was. Born in 70 or 69 BC, depending on your record, in Alexandria, Egypt, Cleopatra was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which we'll get more into them later. After the death of her father, Ptolemy XII, she would have constant infighting with her siblings on who would take over the throne, with her coming out on top. During her reign, she would have a complicated relationship with the Roman Empire, with her having affairs with Julius Caesar and later married his trusted advisor, Mark Antony. Basically, she would keep Rome at bay mainly through diplomacy, however, things were about to change. You see, in 44 BC, after Julius Caesar came down with a bad case of backstabbing, Rome kind of went through some internal conflict for the next decade, with at first Mark Antony and Caesar's successor Augustus avenging the death of the dictator. However, the two had a falling out and Augustus saw it as a chance to crush his rival and take over Egypt. So in 32 BC, Rome would declare war on Egypt and attack. Cleopatra would lead a large naval fleet against the Romans, and for a while she would do her best to combat them, but in the end her efforts were fruitless. In 30 BC, Rome would invade Egypt and finally conquer the country, thus officially making it a part of the Roman Empire. And in the end, Mark Antony would end up offing himself. Cleopatra, hearing about her husband's death and fearing she would become a trophy for the Romans, took her own life as well. But she wasn't killed by a venomous snake, despite what some legends will say. So, was Cleopatra black? Not even close. Remember when I said Cleo was from the Ptolemaic dynasty? Well, the Ptolemaic dynasty were Greeks who descended from the generals of Alexander the Great who conquered Egypt in the 300 BC. Cleopatra was like those kids of those high European officials during the imperial era of the 19th century, who lived in the colonies but were still European. Basically, she'd be known as a descendant of colonizers by today's standards. So all the Egyptians who keep saying Egypt for the Egyptians and claiming Cleopatra was their own, I gotta tell you this, but ethnically she was never Egyptian, she was Greek. Okay, so that concludes that she's white then because she was Greek, right? Well, technically yes, but the thing is, race wasn't even a big deal back then. I mean, yes, humans back then as they do today still categorized themselves, and there was bigotry anyway, as the Romans would view anyone not them as inferior and barbaric, such as the Goths of Northern Europe or the Huns of Central Asia. But it's only in recent history, such as the 1500s, where the concept of race as we know it will be established. And even then, the question of whether Greeks are white is a topic that is still highly debated to this day.
Look, I am more white than you. You look blonde hair.
But for the sake of argument, yes, Cleopatra would be white by today's standards. So how did this whole ordeal start in the first place? Well, let's get something out of the way first. Yes, the ancient Egyptians were black. If you look at very ancient wall paintings, you will definitely see Egyptians with darker skin tones, and some of the paintings look like that of inhabitants of sub-Saharan Africa. Though we also do see Egyptians of lighter skin tones, proving that this might have been a lot more of a diverse society than most people think it was. So how do we get to today where even Egyptians are denying their African roots? Well, remember when I said they're basically celebrating their colonial past and how Cleopatra was the descendant of colonizers? Well, around the 600s BC, ancient Egypt would constantly be conquered by various foreign forces, ranging from the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Ottoman Turks, and of course, like everyone, eventually, the Brits. So much so that Egypt wouldn't truly be free from foreign influence until the 1950s with the rise of Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser. Because of these conquests, there would be constant mixing between the populations to the point where modern-day Egyptians have little in common with their ancient ancestors. However, there is a small section of the population that still look like the Egyptians of previous millenniums ago. And I think this is where the confusion comes from. It's not that I don't think people are getting it actually wrong about Egyptians being black, but it was more of a common thing before Cleopatra was born. So that begs the question, where did the notion that Cleopatra was black come from?
It's part Greek. You may have Greek blood in you that don't make you white. Oh, Cleopatra was black. She'd been a white woman. That was during the white times. Look.
While the idea of her being black goes as far back as the 1800s, it wasn't until Jamaican-American writer Joel Augustus Rogers, with his book The World's Greatest Men of Color, who made the idea more mainstream. Here he would claim Cleopatra along with other figures such as the Greek philosopher Aesop, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, and even the British Queen Charlotte as either being black or having black ancestry. And these notions have been repeated by black nationalist and supremacist circles who claim that many famous world figures are actually black, and therefore that makes them the superior race. Yes, they even tried to claim the Vikings. And at first glance, it was seen that Rogers is in that category, but not exactly, as Rogers was half white and his goal was to challenge the racist attitudes of the era, where African history has been nearly erased and was trying to find a way to regain it. Unfortunately, he made a lot of mistakes on the way. I don't think there was anything malicious with him, just more idealism and naivete. Now, as for my thoughts on Cleopatra as a ruler, I would say she was actually quite good, as she led her people to a very great age. However, despite being a total girl boss who took charge and had many impressive feats, ironically, I believe it's sexism is the reason why Cleopatra is the best known female Egyptian ruler, as she's mainly associated with a relationship with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, even though she's much more than that. That being said, I do believe she's overrated, and I feel like there should be other female pharaohs that should get the spotlight, like Sabrak-Nefru, who was the first female pharaoh. Hatshepsut, who led Egypt to a prosperous age along with there being a long-standing peace between Egypt and its rivals. And Nefertiti, who was responsible for changing Egypt's religious structure from polytheism to monotheism. Also, huge apologies for butchering these names. But that's probably another reason why I think Cleopatra gets more attention, because Cleo is the more recent compared to the previously mentioned female pharaohs. After all, she was the last one in general. Overall, while yes, Cleopatra is technically white, I feel it's time to move on from her and focus on other rulers of the region. Let's just try to keep Netflix as far away from them as possible, shall we? Hell, they couldn't even do the European ones right.